Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to ask for a couple of minutes of your time. If you're finding Sleepy Time Tales helpful to help you deal with insomnia and help you get a good night's sleep, and you have the means to help me out, to help me keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you every week, please consider supporting it on Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that helps me keep the lights on and gets you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. From as little as $2 a month, you can help me keep the lights on and keep this show going. And if monthly is a big ask, which I completely understand, you can make once-off tips whenever you got a little bit to spare through the tip jar on the website. I've also got some merchandise up in a TeePublic store, which you can reach through the show notes. And I'm also doing podcast editing full-time. So if you or someone you know is starting a podcast and you're needing a little bit of a helping hand, or you have a show already and you're struggling to keep up with it and keeping consistent because the editing is taking too much time and is annoying, then I'm here to help. Just pop me a mail at my info in the show notes as well, and we can get you started and making your life a lot easier. And that's that for tonight. Thanks for taking the time. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange thing, this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? Lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night, or maybe sometimes background noise or company. As far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. The main idea is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for you. But maybe you need something a little bit different. Maybe you just need some kind of background. Some people like white noise, some people like the sound of the ocean, some people like the rain or the wind in the trees, and some people just like the sound of a boring dude droning on in the background. As you're listening, don't try to force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important you don't feel pressurized. This actually probably won't work for you if it's your first night. It'll probably take you a few nights to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you. Maybe one episode just isn't long enough. Or maybe your problem isn't so much going to sleep. Maybe your problem is waking up in the middle of the night. What you can do in that case is just let the podcast run all night. Download a whole bunch of episodes, put them in a playlist, start them when you go to bed and let them run. That way, if you wake up and you find yourself staring at the ceiling, you can just carry on listening and go straight back to sleep again. You can even do the same thing if you find yourself regularly waking up before the alarm. 60 minutes or as little as 30 minutes. Carry on listening, drift off again. And you may wonder what the point is. After all, what good to you is an extra 30 minutes of sleep? But I've had people thank me for this because there is something about allowing yourself complete relaxation right before the alarm that's satisfying on a whole new level. And as you're listening, just try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you, so give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. We return this week to Memoirs of Extraordinary Popular Delusions, Volume 1, by Charles Mackay. Amid events like these, which, humiliating though they be, partake largely of the ludicrous, others occurred of a more serious nature. Robberies in the streets were of daily occurrence, in consequence of the immense sums, in paper, which people carried about with them. Assassinations were also frequent. One case in particular fixed the attention of the whole of France, not only on account of the enormity of the offence, but of the rank and high connections of the criminal. The Count de Horn, a younger brother of the Prince de Horn, and related to the noble families of d'Arenberg, de Ligne, and de Montmorency, was a young man of dissipated character, extravagant to a degree and unprincipled as he was extravagant. In connection with two other young men as reckless as himself, named Mille, a Piedmontese captain, and one d'Estampes, or Lestang, a Fleming, he formed a design to rob a very rich broker, who was known, unfortunately for himself, to carry great sums about his person. The Count pretended a desire to purchase of him a number of shares in the Company of the Indies, and for that purpose appointed to meet him in a cabaret, or low public house, in the neighbourhood of the Place Vendôme. The unsuspecting broker was punctual to his appointment, so were the Count de Horn and his two associates, whom he introduced as his particular friends. After a few moments' conversation, the Count de Horn suddenly sprang upon his victim and stabbed him 3 times in the breast with a poignard. The man fell heavily to the ground, and while the Count was employed in rifling his portfolio of bonds in the Mississippi and Indian schemes, to the amount of 100,000 crowns, Mille, the Piedmontese, stabbed the unfortunate broker again and again to make sure of his death. But the broker did not fall without a struggle, and his cries brought the people of the cabaret to his assistance. Lestang, the other assassin, who had been set to keep watch at a staircase, sprang from a window and escaped. But Mille and the Count d'Horn were seized in the very act. This crime, committed in open day and in so public a place as a cabaret, filled Paris with consternation. The trial of the assassins commenced on the following day, and the evidence being so clear, they were both found guilty and condemned to be broken alive on the wheel. The noble relatives of the Count de Horn absolutely blocked up the antechambers of the regent, praying for mercy on the misguided youth, and alleging that he was insane. The regent avoided them as long as possible, being determined that in a case so atrocious, justice should take its course. But the importunity of these influential suitors was not to be overcome so silently, and they at last forced themselves into the presence of the regent, and prayed him to save their house the shame of a public execution. They hinted that the Princes d'Horn were allied to the illustrious family of Orleans, and added that the regent himself would be disgraced if a kinsman of his should die by the hands of a common executioner. The regent, to his credit, was proof against all their solicitations, and replied to their last argument in the words of Corneille, adding that whatever shame there might be in the punishment, he would very willingly share with the other relatives. Day after day they renewed their entreaties, but always with the same result. At last they thought that if they could interest the Duke de Saint-Simon in their layout, a man for whom the regent felt sincere esteem, they might succeed in their object. The Duke, a thorough aristocrat, was as shocked as they were. That a noble assassin should die by the same death as a plebeian felon, and represented to the regent the impolicy of making enemies of so numerous, wealthy, and powerful a family. He urged, too, that in Germany, where the family of de Herrenberg had large possessions, it was the law that no relative of a person broken on the wheel could succeed to any public office or employ until a whole generation had passed away. For this reason, he thought the punishment of the guilty count might be transmuted into beheading, which was considered all over Europe as much less infamous. The regent was moved by this argument, and was about to consent, when Law, who felt peculiarly interested in the fate of the murdered man, confirmed in him his former resolution to let the law take its course. The relatives of d'Horn were now reduced to the last extremity. The Prince de Montmorency, despairing of other methods, found means to penetrate into the dungeon of the criminal, and offering a cup of poison, implored him to save them from disgrace. The Count d'Horn turned away his head, and refused to take it. Montmorency pressed him once more, and losing all patience at his continued refusal, turned on his heel and exclaimed, "Die then, as thou wilt, mean-spirited wretch. Thou art fit only to perish by the hands of the hangman." Left him to his fate. d'Horn himself petitioned the regent that he might be beheaded, but Law, who exercised more influence over his mind than any other person, with the exception of the notorious Abbé de Bois, his tutor, insisted that he could not in justice succumb to the self-interested views of the d'Horns. The regent had from the first been of the same opinion, and within 6 days after the commission of their crime, d'Horn and Millet were broken on the wheel in the Place de Grève. The other assassin, Lestang, was never apprehended. This prompt and severe justice was highly pleasing to the populace of Paris. Even Monsieur de Quincampoix, as they called Law, came in for a share of their approbation, for having induced the regent to show no favour to a patrician. But the number of robberies and assassinations did not diminish. No sympathy for rich jobbers when they were plundered. The general laxity of public morals, conspicuous enough before, was rendered still more so by its rapid pervasion of the middle classes, who had hitherto remained comparatively pure, between the open vices of the class above and the hidden crimes of the class below them. The pernicious love of gambling diffused itself through society, and bore all public, and nearly all private, virtue before it. For a time, while confidence lasted, an impetus was given to trade, which could not fail to be beneficial. In Paris especially, the good results were felt. Strangers flocked into the capital from every part, bent not only upon making money but on spending it. The Duchess of Orleans, mother of the regent, computes the increase of the population during this time, from the great influx of strangers from all parts of the world, at 305,000 souls. The housekeepers were obliged to make up beds in garrets, kitchens, and even stables for the accommodation of lodgers, and the town was so full of carriages and vehicles of every description that they were obliged in the principal streets to drive at a foot pace for fear of accidents. The looms of the country worked with unusual activity to supply rich laces, silks, broadcloths, and velvet, which being paid for in abundant paper, increased in price fourfold. Provisions shared the general advance. Bread, meat, and vegetables were sold at prices greater than had ever before been known, while the wages of labor rose in exactly the same proportion. The artisan who formerly gained 15 sous per diem now gained 60. New houses were built in every direction. An illusory prosperity shone over the land, and so dazzled the eyes of the whole nation that none could see the dark cloud on the horizon, announcing the storm that was too rapidly approaching. Law himself, the magician whose wand had wrought so surprising a change, shared, of course, in the general prosperity. His wife and daughter were courted by the highest nobility, and their alliance sought by their heirs of ducal and princely houses. He bought 2 splendid estates in different parts of France, and entered into a negotiation with the family of the Duc de Sully for the purchase of the Marquisate of Rosnay. His religion being an obstacle to his advancement, the regent promised, if he would publicly conform to the Catholic faith, to make him Comptroller General of the Finances. Law, who had no more real religion than any other professed gambler, readily agreed, and was confirmed by the Abbé de Tencin in the Cathedral of Melun, in presence of a great crowd of spectators. On the following day he was elected honorary churchwarden of the parish of St. Roch, on which occasion he made it a present of the sum of 500,000 livres. His charities, always magnificent, were not always so ostentatious. He gave away great sums privately, and no tale of great distress ever reached his ears in vain. At this time he was by far the most influential person of the state. The Duke of Orleans had so much confidence in his sagacity and the success of his plans that he always consulted him upon every matter of moment. He was by no means unduly elevated by his prosperity, but remained the same simple, affable, sensible man that he had shown himself in adversity. His gallantry, which was always delightful to the fair objects of it, was of a nature so kind, so gentlemanly, and so respectful, that not even a lover could have taken offence at it. If upon any occasion he showed any symptoms of haughtiness, it was to the cringing nobles, who lavished their adulation upon him till it became fulsome. He often took pleasure in seeing how long he could make them dance attendance upon him for a single favour. To such of his own countrymen as by chance visited Paris, and sought an interview with him, he was on the contrary all politeness and attention. When Archibald Campbell, Earl of Islay, and afterwards Duke of Argyll, called upon him in the Place Vendôme, he had to pass through an antechamber crowded with persons of the first distinction, all anxious to see the great financier, and have their names put down as first on the list of some new subscription. Law himself was quietly sitting in his library, writing a letter to the gardener at his paternal estate of Lauriston about the planting of some cabbages. The Earl stayed for a considerable time, played a game of piquet with his countrymen, and left him charmed with his ease, good sense, and good breeding. Among the nobles who, by means of the public credulity at this time, gained sums sufficient to repair their ruined fortunes, may be mentioned the names of the Dukes de Bourbon, de Guiche, de la Force. The Duke de la Force gained considerable sums, not only by jobbing in the stocks, but in dealing of porcelain, spices, etc. It was debated for a length of time in the Parliament of Paris whether he had not, in his quality of spice merchant, forfeited his rank in the peerage. It was decided in the negative. A caricature of him was made, dressed as a street porter, carrying a large bale of spices on his back, with the inscription, Admirez la Force. De Chaulnes and Dantin, the Marechal d'Estrées, the Princes de Rohan, de Poix, and de Leon, the Duke de Bourbon, son of Louis XIV, by Madame de Montespan, was particularly fortunate in his speculations in Mississippi paper. He rebuilt the royal residence of Chantilly in a style of unwonted magnificence, and being passionately fond of horses, he erected a range of stables which were long renowned throughout Europe, and imported 150 of the finest racers from England to improve the breed in France. He bought a large extent of country in Picardy, and became possessed of nearly all the valuable lands lying between the Oise and the Somme. When fortunes such as these were gained, it is no wonder that Law should have been almost worshipped by the mercurial population. Never was monarch more flattered than he was. All the small poets and literateurs of the day poured floods of adulation upon him. According to them, he was the saviour of the country, the tutelary divinity of France. Wit was in all his words, goodness in all his looks, and wisdom in all his actions. So great a crowd followed his carriage whenever he went abroad, that the regent sent him a troop of horse as his permanent escort, to clear the streets before him. It was remarked at this time that Paris had never before been so full of objects of elegance and luxury. Statues, pictures, and tapestries were imported in great quantities from foreign countries, and found a ready market. All those pretty trifles in the way of furniture and ornament, which the French excel in manufacturing, were no longer the exclusive playthings of the aristocracy, but were to be found in abundance in the houses of traders and the middle classes in general. Jewellery of the most costly description was brought to Paris as the most favourable mart. Among the rest, the famous diamond, bought by the regent and called by his name, and which long adorned the crown of France. It was purchased for the sum of 2,000,000 livres, under the circumstances which show that the regent was not so great a gainer as some of his subjects, by the impetus which the trade had received. When the diamond was first offered to him, he refused to buy it, although he desired above all things to possess it, alleging as his reason that his duty to the country he governed would not allow him to spend so large a sum of the public money for a mere jewel. This valid and honourable excuse threw all the ladies of the court into alarm, and nothing was heard for some days but expressions of regret that so rare a gem should be allowed to go out of France, no private individual being rich enough to buy it. The regent was continually importuned about it, but all in vain, until the Duke de Saint-Simon, who with all his ability was something of a twaddler, undertook the weighty business. His entreaties being seconded by law, the good-natured regent gave his consent, leaving to law's ingenuity to find the means to pay for it. The owner took security for the payment of the sum of 2 millions of livres within a stated period, receiving in the meantime the interest of 5% upon that amount, and being allowed besides all the valuable clippings of the gem. Saint-Simon in his Memoirs relates with no little complacency his share in the transaction. After describing the diamond to be as large as a green gauge, of a form nearly round, perfectly white, and without flaw, and weighing more than 500 grains, he concludes with a chuckle by telling the world that he takes great credit to himself for having induced the regent to make so illustrious a purchase. In other words, he was proud that he had induced him to sacrifice his duty and buy a bauble for himself at an extravagant price out of the public money. Thus the system continued to flourish till the commencement of the year 1720. The warnings of the Parliament that too great a creation of paper money would, sooner or later, bring the country to bankruptcy were disregarded. The regent, who knew nothing whatever of the philosophy of finance, thought that a system which had produced such good effects could never be carried to excess. If 500 millions of papers had been of such advantage, 500 millions additional would be of still greater advantage. This was the grand error of the regent, and which law did not attempt to dispel. The extraordinary avidity of the people kept up the delusion, and the higher the price of Indian and Mississippi stock, the more billets de banque were insured to keep pace with it. The edifice thus reared might not unaptly be compared to the gorgeous palace erected by Potemkin, that princely barbarian of Russia, to surprise and please his imperial mistress. Huge blocks of ice were piled one upon another. Ionic pillars of chastest workmanship in ice formed a noble portico and a dome of the same material, shone in the sun which had just strength enough to gild, but not to melt it. It glittered afar like a palace of crystals and diamonds. But there came one warm breeze from the south, and the stately building dissolved away, till none were able even to gather up the fragments. So with law and his paper system. No sooner did the breath of popular mistrust blow steadily upon it, than it fell to ruins, and none could raise it up again. The first slight alarm that was occasioned was early in 1720. The Prince de Conti, offended that law should have denied him fresh shares in India stock, at his own price, sent to his bank a demand payment in specie of so enormous a quantity of notes that 3 wagons were required for its transport. Law complained to the regent, and urged on his attention the mischief that would be done if such an example found many imitators. The regent was but too well aware of it, and sending for the Prince de Conti, ordered him, under penalty of his high displeasure, to refund to the bank 2/3 of the specie which he had withdrawn from it. The prince was forced to obey the despotic mandate. Happily for Law's credit, de Conti was an unpopular man. Everybody condemned his meanness and cupidity, and agreed that Law had been hardly treated. It is strange, however, that so narrow an escape should not have made both Law and the regent more anxious to restrict their issues. Others were soon found who imitated, from motives of distrust, example which had been set by de Conti in revenge. The more acute stock jobbers imagined justly that prices could not continue to rise forever. Borden and La Richardière, renowned for their extensive operations in the funds, quietly and in small quantities at a time, converted their notes into specie and sent it away to foreign countries. They also bought as much as they could conveniently carry of plate and expensive jewelry, and sent it secretly away to England or to Holland. For Malay, a jobber who sniffed the coming storm, procured gold and silver coin to the amount of nearly 1,000,000 of livres, which he packed in a farmer's cart and covered over with hay and cow dung. He then disguised himself in the dirty smock frock or blouse of a peasant, and drove his precious load in safety into Belgium. From thence he soon found means to transport it to Amsterdam. Hitherto no difficulty had been experienced by any class in procuring specie for their wants, but this system could not long be carried on without causing a scarcity. The voice of complaint was heard on every side, and inquiries being instituted, the cause was soon discovered. The council debated long on the remedies to be taken, and Law, being called on for his advice, was of opinion that an edict should be published, depreciating the value of coin 5% below that of paper. The edict was published accordingly, but failing of its intended effect, was followed by another, in which the depreciation was increased to 10%. The payments of the bank were at the same time restricted to 100 livres in gold and 10 in silver. All these measures were negatory to restore confidence in the paper, though the restriction of cash payments within limits so extremely narrow kept up the credit of the bank. Notwithstanding every effort to the contrary, the precious metals continued to be conveyed to England and Holland. The little coin that was left in the country was carefully treasured, or hidden until the scarcity became so great that the operations of trade could no longer be carried on. In this emergency, Law hazarded the bold experiment of forbidding the use of specie altogether. In February 1720, an edict was published, which instead of restoring the credit of the paper as was intended, destroyed it irrecoverably, and drove the country to the very brink of revolution. By this famous edict it was forbidden to any person whatever to have more than 500 livres, £20 sterling of coin in his possession, under pain of a heavy fine and confiscation of the sums found. It was also forbidden to buy up jewelry, plate, and precious stones, and informers were encouraged to make search for offenders, by the promise of 1/2 the amount they might discover. The whole country sent up a cry of distress at this unheard-of tyranny. The most odious persecution daily took place. The privacy of families was violated by the intrusion of informers and their agents. The most virtuous and honest were denounced for the crime of having been seen with a louis d'or in their possession. Servants betrayed their masters, one citizen became a spy upon his neighbor, and arrests and confiscations so multiplied that the courts found a difficulty in getting through the immense increase of business thus occasioned. It was sufficient for an informer to say that he suspected any person of concealing money in his house, and immediately a search warrant was granted. Lord Stair, the English ambassador, said that it was now impossible to doubt of the sincerity of Law's conversion to the Catholic religion. He had established the Inquisition, after having given abundant evidence of his faith in transubstantiation by turning so much gold into paper. Every epithet that the popular hatred could suggest was showered upon the regent and the unhappy law. Coin to any amount above 500 livres was an illegal tender, and nobody would take paper if he could help it. No one knew today what his notes would be worth tomorrow. Never, says Duclos in his secret Memoirs of the Regency, was seen a more capricious government. Never was a more frantic tyranny exercised by hands less firm. It is inconceivable to those who were witness of the horrors of those times, and to look back upon them now as on a dream, that a sudden revolution did not break out. That law and the regent did not perish by tragical death. They were both held in horror, but the people confined themselves to complaints, a sombre and timid despair, a stupid consternation, had seized upon all, and men's minds were too vile even to be capable of a courageous crime. It would appear that at one time a movement of the people was organized. Seditious writings were posted up against the walls and were sent in handbills to the houses of the most conspicuous people. One of them, given in the Memoirs de la Regence, was to the following effect: Sir and Madam, this is to give you notice that a St. Bartholomew's Day will be enacted again on Saturday and Sunday, if affairs do not alter. You are desired not to stir out, nor you nor your servants. God preserve you from the flames. Give notice to your neighbors. Dated Saturday, May 25th, 1720. The immense number of spies with which the city was infested rendered the people mistrustful of one another, and beyond some trifling disturbances made in the evenings by an insignificant group, which was soon dispersed, the peace of the capital was not compromised. And on that tense note, I'm going to leave it for now. If you'd like to pick up where we've left off, as always, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get the new episodes whenever they come out. Good night and sweet dreams.